Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Visto show. If you can see me, hear me, please let me know in the chat if you're tuning in live on LinkedIn. It is Friday, October the 20th. How the heck are you? My goodness, what a show we have planned for today. If you're tuning in live, please feel free to drop a hello in the chat. Also, just a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, if you can see me okay, if the volume is all right, if you're feeling good on a Friday. Now, as you can see, normally the Visto show the last 2 months has been pretty easy. Why? Because it's just been a crazy world, right? There's a lot going on, a lot of drama, a lot of news, a lot of big stuff going on with IRCC, all that kind of fun stuff. And my goodness, has the last 2 or 3 weeks given me plenty of content to work with, right? So we're going to get into that. Let's go into the chat first. Sai with the thumbs up. Thanks very much, Sai, for tuning in. Andra says, can see you. Thanks very much, Andra. Hope you're doing well. Ipek with the double thumbs up. Ipek, thank you for tuning in. Verinder says, hello, Josh. Hey, Verinder. How you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Sahil with the thumbs up. Hamed says, everything's all right, Josh. Awesome. I am glad to hear it. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in live. If you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, don't forget, I do this live on LinkedIn every 2 weeks on Friday, 12 p.m. noon Eastern. Why is it cool to tune in live? Because, as you see throughout the video, I ask questions, I take questions, I take comments, all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of join in on the conversation, which is kind of fun for you. It's also kind of fun for me because it makes it a two-way street. So anyways, wait, Andra says, can't see you. You can't or can, Andra? I'm getting a lot of thumbs up, so I'm just going to assume that you meant to change the can't into a can. Anyways, hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to not have the longest introduction because as you can see on the screen here, there's a lot to cover. Now, usually when I go live for the Visto show, there's like 1 or 2 really spicy items to cover, and then there's like 1 or 2 less spicy items to cover, but they're fun to talk about. This is big, right? Look at this list. Every one of these items is like a big, big news headline. So I'm just going to jump right the heck in because I have a feeling that this might be a slightly longer than usual show. I'm just closing the window so that hopefully you guys don't hear too much background noise. Now I can. Okay, awesome. We're all set with Andrew. Andrew, thanks for tuning in. Okay, so item number 1 that we're going to jump into is the Canada-India drama that has continued, in fact, even today, right? So there's a lot of this that is very, very fresh, as per usual. I'm going to share my screen here, and what I'll do is I will put the link to this in the chat so that if you are watching live, you can follow along with me if you'd like. I mean, I'm going to share my screen, so, you can read on my screen as well. But this is from yesterday, October the 19th, right, depending on if you're watching this after the fact. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada to reduce staff in India, right? So basically, all but 21 Canadian diplomats and dependents will remain in India as part of IRCC. They're reducing the number of employees from 27 down to 5. IRCC will continue to accept and process applications, but reduced staffing levels are expected to impact processing times. The large majority of applications from India are already processed outside of the country, with 89% processed through the global network. 5 Canada-based IRCC staff will remain to focus on the work that requires in-country presence, such as urgent processing, visa printing, etc. Clients from India can expect delays over the next few months, including processing times, responses to their inquiries, getting their visas or passports, etc., etc. Now, this is pretty big. Why is this big? Because India makes up the majority of international students to Canada, permanent residents to Canada, visitors to Canada, pretty much everything, right? India makes up the majority of newcomers, visitors, all that kind of stuff into Canada. So this is pretty big. You got to think, even though, I mean, this is the good news here, right? 89% of Indian applications are processed through the global network. If that was a much lower number, then I'd be really concerned, right? Because you got to think, every year IRCC processes millions of applications, right? When you hear numbers like, 500,000 immigrants, that's the number of permanent residence applications that are approved, right? Then we have another 500,000 study permits, another couple 100,000 work permits, another couple 100,000 citizenship applications, a couple million visitor visa applications, right? So by my math, we're talking in the like 3, 4, 5 million applications a year, which is rising. But if a large majority of these Indian applications are processed through the global network, maybe it won't have such a huge effect on processing times. My guess is that it still will, right? Because you have an office that's going to be shorter staffed. So you have to imagine it will negatively affect processing times. By how much and for how long, it's hard to say, but we're going to have to keep an eye out and see. Now, why did this happen, right? So I have this CBC article where it goes into a little bit more detail of kind of like about how and why. So 41 diplomats have left India already as tensions remain high. I'm not going to go into full details. I'll link to this article again in the comments in case you want to kind of do a deep dive. But basically, from my quick read, is that India wants parity, right? Which means they want the number of diplomats in each country to be more equal. Their claim is that there are way more Canadian diplomats in Canada than there are Indian diplomats in India. Apparently that's incorrect. India claimed to only have 21 diplomats in Canada and said that Canada had 62 in India. But then further on in the article, I think it says that apparently there are more than that in Canada. So I don't know, right? That we have two governments that are each saying different things. I don't really know what's right. I don't really know what's wrong. It seems to make sense from an immigration standpoint that we would need more diplomats in India because there's way more Indians applying to come to Canada, right? So that office needs a lot more support, right? But I also don't know the intricacies of what happens at a, what diplomats do on the ground and blah, blah, blah. Now, Canada won't retaliate, so they're not going to ask India to remove any of their diplomats, right? So you can say India's claim to only have 21 accredited diplomats in Canada appears to conflict with the registry in Canada, which shows that India has 60 in Canada, right? So again, there's like a little bit of conflicting data here, but Canada has said, no, we're not going to, in retribution, remove Indian diplomats from Canada. So hopefully trying to, bring down the tensions here a little bit. There's a lot at stake, right? I mean, it's interesting because there's kind of a lot at stake for both sides, right? Which country has more at stake? I don't know. Probably Canada, right? If I think about it from the Indian perspective, there are lots of students and workers and people that want to come to Canada, right? So now they're going to suffer from slower processing times. On Canada's end, if this turns away or delays students, workers, etc. from coming to Canada, that's a huge hit to the economy, right? Because we know that the international student industry is about a $22 billion a year industry in Canada, and Indian citizens make up something like 40% of that, right? So if that shrinks, then that's going to hurt our international student industry. We also know that a large number of skilled workers and PRs come to Canada every year, with a good proportion of those being Indian citizens, right? So if that slows down, is it going to be harder for Canadian companies to bring in the talent that they need? I don't know, right? As always, time will tell. This all stems from the drama related to the murder of, what was that guy's name? Something Nijar. Where is it here? I'm trying to look it up quickly because I have the article open. Hardeep Singh Nijar, who is a Canadian citizen that was apparently murdered in Canada by, allegedly, Indians or someone in relation to the Indian government, right? So that's where kind of all this came from. Anyways, I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see if and how this affects the Canadian immigration process. You have to think at the very least it's going to delay processing times for Indian applications. Now here's the other question. If there's less staff in India to help process those applications, and more of those applications have to be pushed to other embassies in the global network, is it going to slow down applications in other embassies in other countries around the world, right? Is there going to be a cascading effect here? I don't know. My guess would be probably, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Again, the other thing I'm curious about is like, is this going to turn people away from applying to Canada that normally would have otherwise, right? I don't know. Time will tell. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any concerns? Do you have any questions? Do you have any data I haven't covered here? I'm always interested to know that kind of stuff. So if you have any of those, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, it's time to move on to the next, again, important topic as we go back to Express Entry. And before I jump into Express Entry, I'm going to, of course, take my ceremonial sip of water so that I can segue and not lose my voice. And it's time to move over to Express Entry. So last week we had an Express Entry draw. Let me share my screen here. Gabriel says, hi Josh, do you think this will affect other applications for people in other countries? Yeah, so I kind of just alluded to that, Gabriel. I do, right? Because like if we look at this article, it says 89% of India's applications are processed through the global network. So that's a good sign because the global network's already used to handling, apparently, a lot of Indian national applications anyways, right? But if even a couple extra percentage points of applications are not being processed in India and now they have to be pushed abroad, that can be a huge number, right? Like again, by my math, there's probably about 4+ million applications, probably more. Let's be conservative and say 5 million applications a year submitted to IRCC, right? That will also consider that there's a huge number of them that get refused, right? And let's just assume that roughly, India makes up 30%, right? Which is probably below average, right? Because we know for international students, it makes up about 40%. PRs makes up about 40%. I don't know in terms of visitor visas, which is a heavy volume. But let's just say conservatively 30%, right? That's 1.5 million applications coming from Indian nationals per year, right? Now, if 89% of those are already processed abroad, that's roughly 1.335 million applications are already processed abroad, but out of the 1.5 million, that still leaves 165,000, right? So if half of these applications no longer can be processed in India, that's another 80,000 applications that have to get pushed into the global network, right? Again, these are very rough numbers, take it all with a grain of salt. But just some like super rough math to put things into perspective. We could be talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of applications here, right? So I think, Gabriel, that it will. I think it will at least have a small effect. I mean, it'll certainly have an effect on applications being submitted in India for Indian nationals. And considering this information, I would think it has to at least somewhat affect the global network that is handling Indian applications as well, right? Because, for example, there might not be anyone in Latin America, for example, processing Indian national applications. But if there's other embassies and other offices in the global network in the Middle East or in Asia, whatever, and they consistently help with Indian processing, those embassies might, be affected. That's my best guess, right? Only time will tell. Now let's get into Express Entry here, because on October the 10th, good question, thank you, Gabriel. Hope everything's going well. On October the 10th, we had an all-program draw, so it didn't go to any specific industry, where they invited 3,725 people to apply with a minimum score requirement of 500. Mohammed says, hi, Josh. Hey, Mohammed, how you doing? Now, this is, I don't know, what do you guys think of this draw? Was this surprising? Were you expecting something like this? Were you expecting another industry-specific draw, right? Because in the last month or two, we've seen a fair amount of industry-specific draws. And then middle of October, IRCC hits us with this all-program draw, 3,700 people, 500 score, pretty meh, pretty bland, if that makes sense. I think it makes sense, right? I've said this in previous episodes of the Visto show. If you do the math, they're actually pretty much at their limit of what they've budgeted for Express Entry for the entire year, right? So what I've said in previous episodes is I do expect express entry draws to either slow down or shrink, right? Which is what we're seeing here, right? Because in most draws, so typically they do a draw or a round of draws every 2 weeks, and they're inviting anywhere from like 4,000 to 5,000 people to apply, right? So for example, the 2 weeks before that, they invited 4,100 people to apply. The session before that, they invited 4,200 people to apply. The draw before that, they invited 4,300 people to apply. 2 weeks before that, they invited 4,300 people to apply, testing my math here. The week before that, they invited 4,600 people to apply, right? So this number right here, 3,725, is smaller than average. It is below average what we're seeing for the draws every 2 weeks. Is this a surprise? No. Is it still, in line with the fact that express entry has become very difficult? Yes, right? I mean, look at it. The all-program draws have not dipped below 500, with the exception of a 496 in August, and that's it. Oh, here, since June, right? So in June, we had a few 480s in May, but since then, it's like, and even the 480s is not easy either, right? So it's been a very, very rough go for express entry. I said this months ago. If you're not eligible for one of these industry-specific draws, express entry is going to be a very, very tough go, and I think it will continue to be. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Were you surprised by that draw? What do you think is going to happen? I think we're going to continue to see this for the rest of the year. I think we're going to see smaller and smaller draws. I think they'll probably continue to mix in a couple little industry-specific draws here and there. Of course, they don't give us many indications ahead of time, but that's what I expect. Only time will tell, of course. But anyways, very interesting times on the express entry front, and we'll have to wait and see what happens in the future. Rabina with the thumbs up. Rabina, thank you very much for tuning in. Appreciate it. Now, along the same lines, I want to touch on the PR processing backlog report, right? So basically what happened here was that, I'll share my screen again. So when was this released? I think within the last week or so. I don't know if there's a date on this, but there was a report done by the Auditor General of Canada. Sai says, what about stem draws? Will they open any coming years at least? Good question, Sai. I don't know, right? IRCC doesn't tell us these things. It would be great. I say this in almost every Visto show. It would be great if IRCC could just be a little bit more transparent so that we know what to expect in the future. You know what I mean? If we look back, we haven't had a stem draw since July 5th, right? Let me double check this here. I'll put the link to this in the comments as well, Sai, if you want to take a look. There was a stem draw on July the 5th. Was that it? Oh, they've only had one. Yeah, so there's been one stem draw. I thought there was more than that. I thought there might have been a second. No, there's only one. Wow. So yeah, I mean, they don't tell us though, Sai, ahead of time, like how heavy these draws are going to be for which industries. So it's become very, very hard to navigate and just give advice, right? I mean, I know a lot of immigration professionals that are brilliant, but like me, we can't really give advice on express entry. We're flying as blind as you are, right? So hopefully we get some more transparency in the future, but I don't know. Only time will tell. So basically what happened was, moving on to this Auditor General report, this is very much related to express entry and permanent residence, right? So this was a statement released yesterday because I don't know if it was a few days ago or a week ago, the Auditor General prepared a report on processing applications for permanent residence. So you can see here the audit was conducted in 2022 and examined how IRCC processes applications as well as methods for addressing backlogs which highlight critical aspects of our nation's immigration policies. I'm going to link to this in the comments as well, and if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, you'll find all these links in the description as well. Now, basically what happened is the Auditor General did a report on IRCC to see how their efforts are doing, right? Overall, we found that despite recent efforts to improve processing times and reduce backlogs that worsened during the pandemic, most people applying for PR to Canada were still waiting a long time for IRCC to process their applications, and applying to refugee programs were the most affected. I think these reports are very important, although you probably could just ask anyone and their mother and we could have told you this, right? Because processing times are still terrible. The good thing about this report is it comes up with some really interesting data as well, right? So look at this. On average, privately sponsored refugees waited 30 months for a decision, while overseas spouses or common law partners waited 15 months to be reunited with their partners. While processing times improved in most of the programs we examined, they continued to exceed the department's service standards for most applications in 2022, right? So COVID hits in early 2020, and by 2022, we're still feeling the effects. At the end of 2022, large backlogs remained across all PR programs that we examined. Although IRCC announced in 2016 that it was moving to capacity-based processing, we found that the department continued to assign application workloads to offices without assessing whether they had enough resources to process them. Oh my God. For example, the Tanzania office had assigned workloads that was 5 times greater than the Rome/Italy office, even though both offices had a comparable number of staff. So, I don't know. I'm not going to read through every line of this report. We all kind of know, right? Hey, IRCC is still way too slow, right? Did we need a report to know this? No, but this is I'm glad they do these reports because number one, the data is really good, and number two, we can kind of keep IRCC honest, right? Let's look at a few of these facts. In 2022, Canada met its admission target of new permanent residents, 431,000. In 2025, it expects to welcome 500,000. IRCC processes permanent resident applications across 87 offices with approximately 2,600 staff in Canada. So if we do some more math here, 500,000 PR applications only, divided by 2,600 staff. That's 192 applications processed per staff member. Is that correct? That doesn't seem like that much. That actually does seem pretty reasonable. That only counts the PR applications, right? But that does seem like a somewhat, each staff, I thought each staff processes like multiple applications a day. So I guess that's pretty good. By the end of 2022, about 99,000 refugee applications were still waiting to be processed. Processing times for refugee programs were almost 3 years on average. Jeez. Okay. Julia says, hey Josh, if you met a wizard who could make you one immigration wish true, what would you ask for? A new program, a new stream, a new immigration tool? What would you pick? Julia, that's a great question. I would ask for the total opposite of what, and I know you're just making suggestions. Here's the one, I'm going to give two, right? Because I make the rules here, right? It's a great question, but I'm going to make the rules here. 2 wishes. Number 1 is the absolute opposite. Create nothing new, shave out all the new stuff, focus on optimizing the core skeleton of what we have. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record. You'll hear this in almost every Visto show that I do, right? IRCC's problem is not having enough programs. It's having too many programs that aren't efficient enough. Because when you have too many programs, it confuses people and it requires way more IRCC staff and processes. What I would do is shave all the fat and make the core programs fast. Just make LMIs fast again. Make work permits fast again. Make express entry 6 months processing again. We don't need all these little draws and this and that and pilots and this and that and the other if the programs that we had in place were faster. That's my opinion. That's my advice. If I could go into IRCC for 1 month and just have meetings with them and kind of reshuffle the whole organization and focus, would be let's cut 50%, 60%, 70% of the fat. Let's get our core back in place. The core pieces, I think, at IRCC are phenomenal. I think the LMI and the work permit processes are pretty good. I think Express Entry is a great program. I think GTS is a great program. I think the study permit program needs a little bit of adjustments, but that's a bigger conversation and a bigger can of worms. What I would do is shave all the fat, focus all of the resources on making the basic program simpler, easier to use, and faster to process. And then we won't need half of the new programs. Secondly, and this is just my cherry on top, I would just request more transparency. I said this earlier on this episode. I'm going to say it in many future episodes as well. Why can't they just be a little bit more transparent with what's going to happen? What are their plans with Express Entry draws for the rest of the year, right? What are processing times going to look like given A, B, and C, right? Why can't they just be a little bit more transparent? Are they going to be doing more STEM draws? Are they going to be doing more agricultural draws, right? I don't know. A little bit more transparency could go such a long way. It's a great question. Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Gabriel says, when processing times increase, that affects those already whose application is already submitted? Well, it kind of depends, Gabriel, right? It depends on the type of application, depends on the embassy, right? Some embassies are much faster than others. Some programs are processed much faster than others. But if you've already applied but your application's still sitting in the middle of a pile, then it could still be affected, right? So I just wanted to lastly with this audit, just why I just want to cover kind of like the last few details, why we did this audit. IRCC is committed to reducing long wait times, prompt processing, blah, 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 blah. Efforts to improve backlog should benefit, blah, okay. Highlights and recommendations. To provide applicants with clear expectations, IRCC should establish achievable and reliable service standards for the processing of PR applications, including for its refugee programs. In addition, online information on expecting processing time should be provided. Yep, agreed. To improve, like even if the average processing standards go up, I think that's fine as long as they're more accurate, right? Don't tell us 3 weeks if it's going to be 3 months, right? It just doesn't benefit anybody. To improve consistency across its offices, IRCC should match assigned workloads with available resources, and it should support these decisions with reliable information on the available capacity. Yep, should act immediately to address application backlogs that have accumulated. That's a great idea. To support timely processing, IRCC should examine differential outcomes in processing times related to the implementation of automated decision-making tools and reduce these disparities to the extent possible, including by reallocating sufficient resources. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it makes sense, and then IRCC came out with a statement basically saying, I welcome the the Auditor General's report. It was conducted in 2022. I mean, it's like basic kind of like government fodder, you know what I mean? Immigration's critical to Canada's success, blah, blah, blah. We've prioritized, blah, blah, blah. Our goal is to process 80% within service standards. We're making consistent progress towards that objective. Well, it doesn't seem like it according to the report. But anyways, this year Canada has already welcomed 339,000 PRs, up from 310,000. Okay. So anyways, I don't know. This is just, I mean, you guys can read this if you want, right? Basically, they're trying to make improvements. The report says they're not really making improvements. IRCC says they're making improvements. You know, I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to touch on it. Gabriel says, thanks, Josh. My pleasure, Gabriel. I wanted to touch on it because it is pretty important. But I don't know what the key takeaway is, right? The key takeaway is there's some interesting data from the AG report. Things are still slow. Things are still backlogged, especially for refugee applications. They make a few recommendations. God knows if IRCC is going to follow it. And, you know, it's another day in the office, right? So anyways, quick sip of water as we transition over. The next item I quickly wanted to talk about is the Israeli-Hamas war. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because, as most of you know, I try not to get too political, right? When I do the Visto show, I like to talk about immigration news, Canadian immigration updates, things around the world that might affect Canadian immigration, which this kind of does, but it also certainly affects me personally, right? For those who don't know, I am Jewish, right? I've been practicing as an immigration lawyer for the last 8+ years in Canada, right? Which means that, number one, I have family and friends that were affected by the terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel about 2 weeks ago now. some of my family, not family, some of my friends had friends and family that were very, very deeply affected, meaning some of them were murdered, right? Is basically what I'm trying to say here. So number one, there are people close to me that have been deeply, deeply affected by what happened. Number two, someone who's, as I've been working in immigration, I mean, I've spent the last 8 years working with people from all over the world, right? We've helped people from Pakistan, Iran, Israel, Gaza, India, everywhere, right? Everywhere all over the world, right? People from all over the world. And one of the great things about working in Canada and working in immigration is that I see how people can live together in peace, right? Canada is the perfect example of a melting pot of mostly peace, right? We're a very peaceful country. We have tons of immigrants in Canada, right? Immigration makes up a huge part of our country. And if anything, my experiences working with hundreds, maybe over 1,000 people from around the world and helping them come to Canada is that the vast majority of them are great people who I got along with very well and we had great business relationships with, right? So again, I don't want to take strong stances here. I don't want to get overly political here. There's innocent people and civilians on both sides that unfortunately are going to pay the price for what's happened and what continues to happen, right? Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be a quick resolution, because when you do what Hamas did in the way that they did it, I don't think you can expect Israel to sit back and do nothing. Again, I don't want to get into the details of who's more right and who's more wrong and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's the purpose of this show. But I do want to raise some transparency and just awareness of what's happening, maybe why it's happening, and that really what most of us want is peace, right? We want everybody to be able to live in peace. I don't think it's going to come in the short term, but I hope it does in the mid and the long term. Also, my hearts and my prayers and thoughts go out to everybody else who's been affected, right, negatively, on both sides. Like I said, especially there's a lot of innocent people, civilians, young people, women, children, men, right? I mean, men can be victims too, right? Just like women. So it's terrible. It's a crazy world we live in the last few years, and God knows how it'll end. Hopefully peacefully for everybody, but I guess time will tell. Julia says, sorry to hear your family and friends are affected by this war. Wish your family to stay safe. Thank you, Julia. I do really appreciate the kind words. Anthony says, Josh, I'm very sorry to hear about what happened to people that you know, and I salute you for your professionalism. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm lucky. I grew up in Canada. I've lived here my whole life. I've never really been threatened at all, right? My ancestors and people that came before me suffered a lot, right? Continue to suffer in certain parts of the world. Luckily, Canada is a very welcoming and friendly place, although we are seeing very scary things in the news. I will say that last week was the first time I've ever felt threatened just being Jewish, right? Like just waking up and being Jewish, when Hamas called for a day of reckoning, right? They called for a jihad last Friday, a week ago today. They called for basically a day of mass terror against Jews all over the world. Thankfully, I did not face any of that. But again, just to raise some awareness, for the first time in my life, right? 32-year-old, been living in Canada my whole life, been working in immigration, work with people from all over the world. Never once feared for my own safety or family's safety until last week. Luckily, everything has been fine. Knock on wood, I hope they continue to go fine. I thank the fact that it's mostly been peaceful in Canada. And I just want everybody else who, is suffering or may be suffering or has friends and family that are suffering, I hope you're doing okay. And our thoughts and prayers go out to all of you. So anyways, I don't want to belabor that point too much. I appreciate everybody's kind words, messages, etc. And it's really the people overseas, in the Middle East that are going through this that I hope, I wish well and I wish safety and I wish for peace. And anyways, I will leave it at that and thank everybody for their support. Okay, it kind of feels weird transitioning from that topic, but anyways, we will quickly talk about, this is another big story, right? Like I was saying at the beginning, Quebec has decided to double tuition fees for out-of-province students. This is huge, right? Because not only does it affect international students, but it affects Canadian students that are outside of the province of Quebec, right? I'm going to share my screen here. So this is an article I found from the Montreal Gazette. I'll throw it in the comments and the description below. But Quebec to double tuition fees for out-of-province students attending English universities. So if I'm an English-speaking person who's living in Ontario and I want to go to whatever, I don't know what the is McGill, or like, I don't know what's considered an English speaking university. I don't know, maybe it says in the article, but like if I just want to go take an English program at McGill University, do I now have to pay double what a Quebec French speaking Canadian citizen has to pay? Quebec is nearly doubling tuition rates for students from other provinces who study in English universities as part of an effort to reduce the amount of English spoken on Montreal streets and increase funding for French language universities. So tuition set to rise to about $17,000 from the current $8,900. The province says enrollment at 3 Anglophone universities will drop starting next year. Jesus, one more gesture to reverse the decline of French in Quebec. The plan announced Friday by French Minister Blabbity Blubbity is expected to cost Quebec's 3 English universities tens of millions of dollars per year. Bishop's University has said it would be very difficult for the university to survive the loss of almost a third of its students. I'm shocked and disappointed, Concordia University Principal Graham Carr said in a side interview. Anglophone universities were never consulted about the drastic changes, he said, and will now be expected to implement a plan. Jeez. So the government just comes out of nowhere. And hold on, Quebec is not only hiking prices to make it unaffordable for students coming from elsewhere, but they're sending out signals, especially in the statements made by Roberge, that effectively students from the rest of Canada who are not francophone are not particularly welcome. That's a really devastatingly poor message to be sending after all the work we've done to build Montreal's reputation. So from the sound, if it affects Concordia, I'm assuming it also affects McGill, which is, like a world-renowned university. The provincial government currently subsidizes students from the rest of Canada to the tune of about $110 million. Okay. Anyways, this is kind of crazy. I guess maybe it won't affect international students because they already pay high tuition. It sounds like this is only out-of-province Canadian students because... here, take for example a full-time Bachelor of Arts and Science student at McGill. If they are from Quebec, they pay $5,300 a year. If they are from another province, they pay $11,000 a year. If they're a foreign student, they pay $44,000. Jesus Christ. That's crazy. Quebec also announced changes to the system for international students. As of the fall of 2024, Quebec will take the first $20,000 in tuition that universities charge international students. In the past, universities can keep the entirety of the tuition. Oh my God. So they're basically saying, number one, if you're a student from outside Quebec and you're coming to a non-French-speaking school, you got to pay double the tuition. And starting in 2024, the first 20 grand of all international student tuition is just going to go to the Quebec government. Jesus. That's crazy. McGill principal Deep Saini said he's very, quote unquote, very disappointed by the announcement. Jeez, yeah, I don't blame him. Oh my God, this is nuts. I didn't even read this whole article, to be honest, in preparation. Here's Quebec's English language universities. Okay, here they go. Bishops, Concordia, and McGill. Did I put this link? Yeah, I already put this link in. Bishops has 2,650 students, 55% from Quebec, 30% from other provinces, 15% international. So, that's going to be huge. If 30%, if you're going to double tuition for students from other provinces, you got to think these numbers are going to be hit hard, no? You got to think this number at least cuts in half, no? 30, what's 30%? Hold on, let's bring up the trusty calculator again. This calculator is the MVP today. 2,650 times 30%. That's almost 800 students in a year. If you're doubling tuition, you got to think that number's going to be cut in half, no? So let's do that. Let's cut it in half. Let's say on a yearly basis, you get like 400 fewer students. And what did they say the tuition's going to be? Was it like 14,000 a year, I think? Where's the, hold on a sec. 17,000. So let's take 397 times 17,000. Or no, we that wouldn't be lost income because that's not what they would normally pay. They would normally pay, what are they paying right now? It was like what, 6,000? Here, 5,300 a year. So let's take 400 times the 5,300 they might normally pay. That's over $2 million a year in lost tuition, right? Assuming that that number gets cut in half. Again, very rough math, right? The Visto Show, we are not mathematicians, right? We are the kings of rough math. So that could be to the tune of millions a year in lost tuition for some of these schools. Anyways, what do you guys think? Is like, I've never been a huge fan of the Quebec government and their approach. Personally, as somebody who has helped clients from Quebec, businesses in Quebec, I don't love their approach to immigration specifically. This seems kind of like they're shooting themselves in the foot a little bit. But anyways, again, time will tell. Sumya says, hello, Josh. I guess even international students will not be allowed in an English institution in Quebec. Well, I think they will be, Sumya. They're just going to have to pay a crap load of money, right? Like, look at the number here. Where was that paragraph? It was crazy. Here we go. So take, for example, a full-time Bachelor of Arts and Science student at McGill University. If they are from Quebec, they pay $5,300 a year in tuition and other fees. $11,400 if they are from another province, and $44,000 if they are a foreign student. Look at how different, those are huge disparities in tuition for the same program. It's crazy, right? It's no surprise that students are frustrated, international students are frustrated. So anyways, it's totally nuts. I wonder what the heck will happen. As I like to say, only time will tell, right? Now, I do have a hard stop at 1 p.m. here, so I got to keep moving and grooving along. Pretty crazy. If you have any thoughts, by all means. I mean, the international student space has been a hot topic for the last half a year, right? And it's probably not going to cool down. So it's always a fun topic to discuss whether the news is kind of more positive or more negative. Now, lastly, quick update. Visto, of course, for those who don't know, Visto is a Canadian immigration tech company, right? Hence the Visto Show. We sell software to Canadian immigration professionals, right? Immigration consultants, immigration lawyers, study abroad companies, all that kind of stuff. We automate processes, right? So we do one-click form filling, one-click supporting document merge and compress and rename and all that kind of stuff. One-click cover letter generation. Manage all your applications in one place. Reminders, notifications, all that kind of stuff. So if you're running an immigration practice or you know somebody who's running an immigration practice or international student agency, stuff like that, and they're busy, they're doing way too much stuff manually, they're sending too many emails back and forth, they're sending PDFs back and forth by email, let me know, right? Or check out Visto.ai. I'll put a link to that in the description as well, obviously, right? You can check us out, and you can let me know if you're interested, right? We really appreciate the support and the help. So if you do get value from the Visto Show and you know an immigration professional and you can mention, hey, have you heard of Visto? That would really help. Quick updates on our side. So we're building in more automation. We're building in now a new application builder. So you can kind of create your own application type, whether that be a PNP or Express Entry or a startup visa or an H&C or whatever, and build your own custom form, build your own custom supporting documents once, reuse it over and over again for any clients in the future to make the process really smooth. We've also got some interesting AI stuff that we're starting to get working on. So that'll be exciting. I think it'll be a very exciting couple few months for our end. So of course, I'll keep you updated as these Visto shows continue on. And that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today. The team is growing, right? If you know any, we're looking for a full stack software developer, preferably not in Canada because we can't afford Canadian salaries right now. But if you know a really good software developer, full stack software developer with at least 4 or 5 years of experience, preferably in our time zone, so like Central South America, who might be interested in working with Visto. Number one, because we're a cool company and, we're cool dudes. And number two is we are open to immigration in the future, right? So in the past, we have hired people from abroad, and if things, worked out well, after a certain amount of time, we're willing to sponsor them and bring them to Canada. So obviously, an immigrant-friendly company. Anyways, that's it for me in terms of the topics that I wanted to discuss today. Now, I do have a few minutes, so let's do a little bit of Q&A if you have any questions about anything we talked about, right? The Canada-India drama, the express entry draws, the PR processing Auditor General report, the war. I don't want to go too deep into discussing that because that could be a rabbit hole. But if you do have any comments or questions, the tuition increases in Quebec or anything related to Visto as well, obviously send me a message. Giordano says, why so frustrated if they can just go somewhere else? Well, Giordano, I think the problem with international students, there's kind of like two lenses to look at that from, right? In terms of the tuition raise in Quebec, if you're a Canadian student, sure, just don't go study in Quebec, right? Like if I was born and raised in Ottawa, right, and I decided to stay in Ottawa to do my undergrad, but if I was deciding on, like, you might be a student who grew up in Vancouver or grew up in Ottawa or grew up in Saskatchewan or grew up wherever, and you're evaluating different schools. Quebec has some pretty reputable universities, right? McGill, Concordia, these are reputable universities. But now, if I'm looking at different programs to do my undergrad in, then I'm not going to go to McGill or Concordia and pay 2-3 times the price, right? So it's really going to hurt them. For those Canadian students, yeah, like you said, they can just go somewhere else, right? They can just go find a university in another province. International students seem to be getting it the worst no matter what, right? Just the fact that you're an international student jacks up your tuition by like 2, 3, 4 times right out of the gate, right? Doesn't matter what province you're studying in or anything like that. So I think it'll be an interesting 2 to 3 to 4 years as we see the international student space evolve and grow and adjust, because we're getting a lot of feedback and drama and pushback, and it's become a pretty shady industry. Students are frustrated now because we have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of international student graduates who are stuck on PGWPs or with expiring PGWPs who can't get PR or can't cover their cost of living, right? Because they can't get a great job. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the international student world. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think it needs a bit of a revamp, right? I think they need to reevaluate the entire program, how the study permit application works, how commission works, how colleges and universities manage agents and their relationships with agents and commission and all that kind of stuff. I think the whole thing needs a revamp, but that's probably a topic for another day. Hamed says, thank you very much, Josh, for today's insights. It was a beneficial wrap-up of the updates with the hope of peace and better performance for all over the world. Well said, Hamed. Thank you very much for tuning in. Glad that you found it helpful. If you did stick around to the very end, really appreciate it. As most of you know, I do this every 2 weeks, right? So every second Friday, I go live at 12 p.m. Eastern, just like this, to talk about the most recent news and updates. I'm going to put 2 links in the description below and or in the comments. Number one is the Visto email list. So I send out an email every 2 weeks, highlighting some news, highlighting the Visto show, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to be reminded about the Visto show and, news and updates, definitely make sure you're signed up to that Visto email list. The other thing I'm going to share is my Substack. So I also have like a more personal weekly update where I share my experience as a entrepreneur, tech co-founder, immigration lawyer in Canada. So if you kind of want to follow my more personal and business journey, I go into more in-depth, what I'm working on at Visto, what I'm focusing on these days. I highly recommend that you subscribe to the Substack as well. And if you do, hope you enjoy. Andrew says, thank you very much, Josh. Andrew, thanks for tuning in as always. Really appreciate the support and keep up that awesome LinkedIn posting. If you're not following Andra, definitely do that. Sumya says, thank you, Josh. Quite an informative session. Thank you, Sumya. Appreciate you as well. Make sure you guys are all connecting, right? That's the other part of the lovely part of tuning in live. You can kind of see some familiar faces, and hopefully all of you can connect and build your networks and all that kind of stuff. Apec says, thank you very much. Great session. Thank you, Apec, for tuning in. To everybody who tuned in, and especially those of you who stuck around till the very end, really appreciate it. Hope you found it helpful. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. As we said earlier, we just want peace, right? We want peace around the world. I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope you and your family stay safe and stay healthy and all that good stuff. Thanks again for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, the video like and the subscribe really helps us grow the channel. And enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. And I will see you in the next one. Maddie says, thank you, Josh. My pleasure. All right, everybody. Josh out. Take care.